I want to introduce our new faculty co-director of the Center for the Constitution, Professor Stephanie Barclay. Stephanie's research focuses on the role our different democratic institutions play in protecting minority rights, particularly at the intersection of free speech and religious free exercise. Professor Barclay's work has or will appear in such leading journals as the Harvard Law Review, the Chicago Law Forum, the University of Pennsylvania Law Review, and the Yale Law Journal Forum. Stephanie has also litigated constitutional cases at both the trial and appellate level, including before the U.S. Supreme Court. She served as a law clerk for Judge Randy Smith on the Ninth Circuit, and while on the faculty of Notre Dame Law School, she clerked for Justice Neil Gorsuch. Following in Justice Gorsuch's footsteps, Stephanie is completing her Doctor of Philosophy degree at Oxford University as a Clarendon Scholar and as a Tang Scholar. Georgetown is so fortunate to have recruited her, as am I personally very fortunate to have recruited her. Please join me in welcoming the new faculty co-director of the Georgetown Center for the Constitution, Professor Stephanie Barclay. It's a big deal. It was. Tonight, we honor the recipient of the 6th Annual Thomas M. Cooley Book Prize. The prize was founded in memory of Thomas McIntyre Cooley, a longtime Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, and a law professor, actually the Dean of the University of Michigan Law School. The Cooley Book Prize awards $50,000, that's $50,000, to the author of an exceptional book that advances our understanding of and commitment to our written Constitution that sits under glass right behind me. Few books exemplify this criteria as well as the winner of tonight's award. Jack Balkin is the Knight Professor of Constitutional Law and the First Amendment at the Yale Law School. He is the founder and director of Yale's Information Society Project, an interdisciplinary center that studies law and new information technologies. He also directs the Abrams Institute for Freedom of Expression and the Knight Law and Media program at Yale. Jack's explication of what he calls framework originalism has long defied the common misperception that originalism is just for political conservatives. While some conservatives were skeptical of his sincerity when he came out as an originalist, Jack has paid no small price from his more left-wing colleagues for him calling it as he sees it. And that is what Jack Balkin has always done. He's called it as he sees it. I'm particularly grateful for the fact that Jack Balkin has been a lecturer at the Center for the Constitution's Originalism Summer Seminar after our first year. And it was during our first year that we polled all the students and said, who should we invite that we haven't invited? And many said Jack Balkin. And so I went to Jack and I said, Jack, I will give you anything you ask for if you'll come and lecture at the second Originalism Summer Seminar. Anything you ask for. And like the mensch that he is, he simply asked for the same fee that all the other lecturers got. And he's been a part of our seminar ever since. I'm very pleased to welcome alums tonight of the Georgetown Center for the Constitution's Originalism Summer Seminar. Jack's book, Memory and Authority, The Uses of History and Constitutional Interpretation, published by the Yale University Press, is a major contribution to the current debate about the proper uses of history beyond interpreting and applying the original meaning of our written Constitution to its proper role in constitutional discourse generally. He shows how lawyers and judges channel history through the standard forms of legal argument, invoking history selectively to construct authority for their claims and undermine the authority of opposing views. Unfortunately for us and for him, Professor Balkin was unable to travel to DC to be with us tonight due to illness. Instead, Professor Larry Solem, my close, dear long-standing friend from the University of Virginia Law School, will accept the award on his behalf and read to you Professor Balkin's acceptance speech. Please join me in congratulating Professor Jack Balkin and in welcoming Professor Solem to the stage.
Thank you, Randy. Jack Balkin is a great friend, a great scholar, and a great rhetorician. I have some very big shoes to fill even reading his remarks. So Jack writes, I had hoped very much to be with you tonight for this celebration, but COVID got in the way. So instead, I send you my best wishes for a good meal and a great lecture to follow. I am very grateful to the Center for the Constitution for this honor, and I'm also grateful to Randy Barnett and to Larry Solem, two old friends who have influenced and inspired my scholarship over the years. Many of the distinguished books that have won this award are works of constitutional history. My book is about how lawyers and judges actually use history. Lawyers and judges have moral and professional obligations to look for and to state historical truth as best they can. But they are also actors in the world who have to persuade others, whether in representing clients or in justifying their decisions. Lawyers and judges want and need history to bestow authority on their arguments. And in that task, they often become memory entrepreneurs. They try to get people to remember things about the past and to remember them differently, hence the book's title, Memory and Authority. The job of a memory entrepreneur may sound a little odd, but it is actually crucial to the task of law in a free society. We live in the present, but we are made from the past. Our memory of the past gives the present its meaning and its moral trajectory. The best historians have always understood this, and if we do not make our claims on the truths of the past, we will end up living in someone else's version of it. If you care about the future of our constitutional republic, you must try to get people to remember things, and you have a duty to the memory of the past and to your fellow citizens. So Jack ends, thank you, and I hope you enjoy your evening, and so do I.
The Thomas Cooley Lecture was established to provide a forum for the best, the brightest, and also the youngest of the federal and state judiciary. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the presence here tonight of a person without whom we would not be here. To date, all of our Cooley lecturers were appointed to the bench by President Donald Trump. The man who was most responsible for identifying and vetting these judges was President Trump's White House counsel, Don McGahn. Please join me in expressing our appreciation to Don for what he has done for our Constitution and for our country. Sorry, Andy. It had to be done. Thank you, Don. Thanks for coming. And now to our main event. I first met tonight's Cooley lecturer, Judge Andrew Oldham, when he was the general counsel to Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Before that, he served as Deputy Solicitor General for the state of Texas, where he twice represented Texas before the U.S. Supreme Court. Judge Oldham has served as a law clerk to Justice Sam Alito, and he clerked for Judge David Sentel on the D.C. Circuit. He earned his BA from University of Virginia with highest honors, his MPhil from Cambridge University, and a JD magna cum laude from Harvard Law School. But we won't hold that against him. Judge Oldham is among the most thoughtful of our, and it's the magna cum laude that we would hold against you, Andy, not the Harvard Law School part. Judge Oldham is among the most thoughtful of our federal judiciary, who has demonstrated a keen interest in the anti-federalists who oppose the Constitution. Without the anti-federalists, we would not have our Bill of Rights, which is encased right behind me. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 2024 Cooley Judicial Lecturer, the Honorable Andrew Oldham.
It is a great honor to be here, and my deepest thanks to Randy Barnett and the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. My wife and I flew in from Austin, Texas last night, and if you know me, you know I'm a very, very proud Texan, and there is no place that I would rather be than Texas. It takes a whole lot to get me out of there. Under almost any set of circumstances, there is no place I would rather be than on our little farm with our kids and our tractor and our chickens. We love Texas so much that we're going to get up tomorrow morning at the crack of dawn so that we can get home and cheer on the #1 ranked Texas Longhorns in the football game of the year against the Georgia Bulldogs. My wife went to one of the University of Texas's greatest in-state rivals, and still, as a rule, we would rather be in Central Texas than anywhere on earth. But every rule obviously has an exception, and this event is an exceptional one that makes me happy to be in Washington, D.C. I mean, my gosh, look at this room. We are meeting tonight in front of the charters of our freedom. This is the first time in my entire life that I did not need to carry a pocket constitution because we literally have the original one here. These are the documents that establish our government, that articulate the principles of our republic, and that unite our United States. But I've got to be honest with you tonight. The states don't seem very united right now. In fact, it's hard for some of us in the room to remember a time when Americans were more vehemently disunited. Our collective rhetoric is hotter than the surface of the sun. Neighbors and coworkers are at each other's throats, and it sure feels like everything is hanging in the balance. Exactly 60 years ago, in October of 1964, Ronald Reagan gave a speech entitled, "A Time for Choosing." He delivered that speech to a deeply divided country, and here we are again. It is time to choose good over evil and virtue over vice. So tonight, I am going to announce my choice, even though it means putting on a hat that causes division in an already divided country and that raises anger even in my own home. Because the Texas Longhorns are going to win the national championship. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If you know my wife, you know how grievous that is for her. But seriously, I would tonight like to talk to you a little bit about sports and law. Sports metaphors have long pervaded our discussions of law. H.L.A. Hart relied on cricket in his influential work on legal positivism. Ronald Dworkin responded to Hart with an analogy from baseball. And more recently, Chief Justice Roberts famously compared judges to umpires who call balls and strikes. Tonight, my metaphor is going to come fittingly from football. And I want you to imagine that two teams show up to a football field. Team A thinks it can win by scoring more points than Team B. Team B, on the other hand, does not particularly care about points. Team B cares only to inflict as many injuries as possible on as many of Team A's players as possible. In short, they don't just disagree about who should win the game, they also disagree about the point of the game and what it even means to win. So the ref blows the whistle and the game starts, and for the first few minutes, it sort of looks like what we understand as football. The teams run plays and so forth. Sure, Team B is getting some penalties. The refs are just throwing flags and penalties like normal, and then things start to go sideways. The hits get harder, the penalties get harsher, and then things get really ugly. Several of Team A's players are seriously injured. 2 have been hospitalized or in critical condition. 1 lays paralyzed on the field. Now, what should our referee do? Should the ref just keep on keeping on, throwing flags like it's just any other Saturday in Austin? Or, to paraphrase my beloved former boss, Justice Alito, would it be freakish to pretend that that game is still football? In 1858, the city of New Haven banned the degenerates at Yale from playing I know, I repeat myself, from playing a sport called mob foot-ball, mob football. It was a gladiatorial contest played under a liberal amalgamation of norms borrowed from soccer and rugby. Why did the city of New Haven ban the sport of mob football? Because it was gruesome, lawless, and as its name implied, evocative of mob violence. Enter a man named Walter Chauncey Camp. Camp was a college student at Yale in the 1870s, and he is credited as being the father of American football because he worked to formalize the rules of the sport. He established the line of scrimmage, the down system, the point system, and he capped the number of players on the field. Camp's rules did 2 very important things for the sport. First, those rules legitimized football. They turned it from mob violence into the sport we know today. So when people showed up to play or to watch a game, they knew that everyone, the players, the coaches, refs, spectators, they all bought into certain rules ex ante. And it is precisely because of that ex ante buy-in that everyone could accept the results of the game ex post. We can say with confidence that Team A won or Team B lost. That is a legitimate result because both teams recognized the way to win the game was to score the most points after 60 minutes of play with 11 men on the field, 4 downs per possession, and so on. The second thing that Camp's rules did is they allowed football to flourish. Team B might have lost today's game, but they could win next week's. They know the field on which next week's game will be played. They know there will in fact be a game next week because the rules prevented Team A from killing any of Team B's players or bribing the refs or taking over the football league and canceling the season. In short, it's precisely because both teams, the winner and perhaps more importantly, the loser, have skin in the game and remain committed to rules-bound football that the games can continue, that the league can grow, and that the sport can become the most popular in our country. In the absence of Camp's rules, each football game might devolve into a zero-sum battle of death that is much more at home in a Roman Colosseum than in the grassy parks of New Haven. So too, I would submit to you tonight, with the constitutional republic. When our founders penned the documents that are behind me, they knew that there would be teams. The teams would be called factions. Their game would be called politics. The touchdowns would be winning control of the government and elections, and the trophies would be the power to enact policies to govern the people. The challenge addressed by the Constitution and its amendments was how to channel these competitive factions towards the common good through neutral, enduring rules, both because the rules legitimize factional competition and because those rules allow the republic to flourish. Our republic has these ground rules, procedures, institutions, and laws to keep things fair. This is all the stuff that we learned when we were in grade school, in civics class, and Schoolhouse Rock. We have 3 branches of government. The powers are separated and balanced. The states retain sovereignty and flourish from federalism. A bill becomes a law through bicameralism and presentment. Judges are independent referees who work to keep the other players on side, and so on. What is the point of the ground rules? It is to free the political branches to focus on substantive disagreement. As in football, the players agree to the ground rules ex ante so that the substantive disagreements can be hammered out on the merits ex post. In a republic, the substantive disagreements are things like how many immigrants should be admitted to the United States? What should the corporate tax rate be? Or what should be the speed limit in a school zone? We have ex ante rule agreements so that we can have these ex post substantive disagreements. And this structure was essential for the republic's success. The founders knew that in a republic as large and as diverse as the United States, people would have deep substantive disagreements. The differences between Massachusetts and Virginia at the founding were not superficial, just as the differences between Texas and New York today do not boil down as to whether bagels or tacos are a better breakfast. The early republic was beset by substantive conflicts. Founding-era Americans divided over whether the American economy would be agrarian or commercial, whether to have a national bank, whether and to what extent we should participate in foreign conflicts, how much immigration to allow, how high the tariffs should be, so on and so on. The Constitution did not answer these substantive questions. The people did not agree in 1789 on how they should be resolved. They knew they couldn't. But what they did agree to were the ground rules that would control the resolution. They agreed to a distribution of powers between the states and the federal government, between the federal branches, and between the people in the government. They agreed to rules for elections. They agreed to be bound by validly enacted federal law. And these ground rules gave them a framework to mediate really important substantive disagreements and to do so in a way that would allow the republic to flourish. Now, when we think about how these substantive disagreements play out, whether in football or in the republic, we tend to focus on referees. The refs play an essential part in both systems. They keep the football players within the proverbial lines, and so too with institutional settlement and the separation of powers. That is why so many of our sports law metaphors also involve referees. For example, H.L.A. Hart pointed out, a game ceases to be cricket once a referee imposes rules other than those of cricket. So if I make up a new strike zone, or I take off my impartial referee hat and I put on a team's helmet, then I have delegitimized the game and turned it into something it is not supposed to be. This reason for a ref-centered focus, I think, is that many of us were raised to think that as long as the rules are enforced neutrally, everything will be fine. The players can hate each other with indescribable and uncontrolled savage vitriol, but as long as we have impartial referees who believe in the rule of law, neutral principles, and institutional settlement, all the hate and the division in the world is manageable. Federalist 51 says ambition checks ambition in government, as we all know. And the same is going to be true in Austin tomorrow night when Texas and Georgia have their titanic clash. And we want these pitched battles, don't we? I mean, as long as the rules are neutral, angry clashes make for fantastic theater on CNN as on ESPN. I was raised this way. I was raised to think that the neutral rules were the most important thing. I grew up reading Herbert Wechsler, Henry Hart, not to be confused with H.L.A. Hart, Albert Sachs, Lon Fuller, John Hart Ely, and Alexander Bickel. Hart and Wechsler's canonical book, The Federal Court's Bible, permanently resides on the corner of my desk. And I am more excited for the upcoming 8th edition of Hart and Wechsler than my 10-year-old daughter is about seeing Taylor Swift. Right? But here is the thing about the legal process school. It does basically nothing to resolve substantive disagreements over first principles. Henry Hart thought that he could reason and procedure his way out of substantive first principles disagreements. And in 1963, he set out to explain in his Holmes lectures at Harvard how. And halfway through his second lecture, the great, inestimable Henry Hart realized that his own theory was a failure, and he sat down. And that brings me to my central point for tonight. In a republic, as in football, the players must agree on more than just the ground rules. They need more than just Walter Chauncey Camp. They need more than just Hart and Wechsler. They also have to agree about the point of the game in the first place. They need to agree that the point of football is to score more points than your opponent, and they need to agree about the ultimate ends of our republic. It's telos. So what are the ultimate ends of the republic? I mean, the documents behind me enshrine numerous ones. So let's go back to the founding and talk about three. First, popular sovereignty. America was founded on the belief, in the words of James Madison, that the people were the fountain of all power. As Gordon Wood explained in his magnum opus on the founding, the founders would come to think of sovereignty in a way entirely different from what other people ever had. Sure, people had previously paid lip service to the idea that the power is derived from the people, but to our founders, this idea became intensely real. At the founding, the people really believed themselves involved in establishing our constitutional order. When the little town of Oldham, Massachusetts, sent its delegates to the state ratifying convention, its residents told the delegates that they were going to decide an issue of the greatest importance that has ever come before any class of men on this earth. And even in our nation's darkest hour, in the midst of the Civil War, President Lincoln famously declared, "The government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." It is unclear whether and to what extent these ideas continue to resonate today. We are lucky when 2/3 of Americans vote. Public confidence in government is at or near all-time lows. 83% of Americans say that elected officials do not care what voters think. And according to Justice Gorsuch's new book, approximately 75% of all federal law originates not in the halls of Congress, but in the cubicles of administrative agencies. Myriad political theorists and self-professed theorists on the app formerly known as Twitter have all sorts of explanations for this, but my point tonight should be simpler and less controversial. What are we to do with a republic that was founded on the vox populi when the populi loses its vox? Second, let's talk about natural rights. The founders believed that the purpose of the government was to secure people's natural rights. As the Declaration of Independence famously says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, there has always been disagreement about what natural rights are, whether and to what extent they're judicially enforceable, whether and to what extent legislatures can regulate them, and so on. Those debates are as old as the Republic itself, and I trust that they will never be resolved lest Randy have to shutter the center. But there is one natural right in particular, the right of conscience, that was not subject to disagreement at the founding. As Professor McConnell put it, the right of conscience was the clearest and universal example of an unalienable natural right at the founding. And the founders believed this right to be all but absolute. As Madison wrote in his celebrated memorial and remonstrance, the religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man. And because a man's conscience is owed to God, not to government, his obligations of conscience must take precedence both in order of time and in degree of obligation to the claims of civil society. Thus, in the first draft of his First Amendment, Madison proposed that the full and equal rights of conscience should not be in any manner or any pretext infringed. And the Fifth Amendment also protects the rights of conscience by prohibiting compelled self-incrimination, a response to the abusive compulsions and infringements of conscience meted out in England's Star Chamber and its Ecclesiastical Court of High Commission. The idea was that in America, we might not share the same religious faith or the same obligations of conscience, but we absolutely respect our neighbor's obligations of conscience, and we recognize that those take precedence over civil government. But that conviction too, is fraying. During COVID, for example, some states shuttered churches and synagogues because religious gatherings posed public health threats. Never mind that in some of these same states, restrictions were put on businesses that were deemed essential, a category that would include liquor stores. Never mind that some Jewish communities required a minyan of 10 men to pray. Never mind that, as Justice Gorsuch observed, some worshipers might seek only to pray in solitude, go to confession, or study in small groups. Never mind that those worshipers believed that their highest duty was owed to God, and never mind that the sacred right of conscience, as Madison thought, should not be abridged on any pretext. Now, my point is not to go back and relitigate COVID, but it is to ask if the purpose of the Republic at the founding was to protect at least some universally accepted natural rights, what does it mean for us when those rights are no longer universally accepted? Third, let's talk about virtue. Western thought has long treated the pursuit of virtue as the fundamental end of human society, and the founders did too. They were obsessed with virtue in all of its forms: classical virtue, civic virtue, religious virtue. Without virtue, Benjamin Franklin wrote, men can have no happiness in this world. And without virtue, future Supreme Court Justice James Iredell said, no theoretical checks, no form of government could render us secure. As a young boy, George Washington copied a list of 110 rules of civility and decent behavior as handwriting practice, and as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, Washington wrote that he was engaged in a noble cause, the cause of virtue and mankind. Now, of course, there have been disagreements in our history about precisely what virtue entails. For example, Ralph Waldo Emerson identified the distinctly American virtues of self-reliance and individualism. Christians conceive of virtue as having a fundamentally, Christ-like character. And of course, there are different virtues for different people. The soldier's martial virtue differs from the judge's jurisprudential virtue. And ever since Cicero's debates with the Epicureans, we have debated which virtue is the highest, that is, which is the summum bonum. But in the past, at least we could agree on the bonum part, that is the good. We agreed that it was good to love our neighbors. We agreed that it was good to work hard. We agreed that it was good to be honest. We agreed that it was good to have a classical education. We agreed that mankind should pursue virtue over vice in his pursuit of happiness. And today, we can agree on none of these things. And if you view social media, or really any media, it is to think that we are collectively pursuing misery. Now, what do these kinds of disagreements portend for our republic? Because remember, the republic was founded on virtue. Not just virtue as some abstract philosophical ideal, but virtue as a practice, as a norm of human behavior. And not just an aspirational norm for individuals, also as a shared collective norm. To the founders, perhaps no 18th century was more influential on this idea than was Montesquieu. And this is how he puts it in his book, The Spirit of the Laws. Virtue may be defined as a love of the laws and of our country. As such love requires a constant preference of public to private interest, it is the source of all private virtues. The great anti-federalist essayist Cato wrote that a virtuous republic would foster, quote, a circle of affections. That is, individuals would form neighborhoods based on shared understandings of right and wrong. Neighbors would then form governments based on the same shared values. The governments would then be responsive to the neighborhoods, both because they were pursuing the same ultimate ends, and neighbors would be affectionate to and want to participate in the government for the same reason. Now, of course, none of this has ever been all sunshine and rainbows. In any election or court case, someone is going to lose. But the Montesquieuian idea of civic virtue teaches that that is okay. Today's loser still loves the law, still loves his system of government, and still prefers public to private interest. Why? Hopefully because he recognizes that the procedures were fair, but perhaps more importantly, because he believes in the substantive ends that the government serves. That is why he is willing and excited to come back tomorrow and to try again. This is precisely how Walter Chauncey Camp succeeded. He started with a group of people who were committed to the idea that the game was worth playing. It just needed rules. So Camp was able to legitimize the game and allow it to flourish by writing those rules down, and by ensuring that even the worst Yaley would honor them. The process of winning and losing by rules would solidify those rules, legitimize the victories and the defeats, and ensure that the players wanted to come back, play again, and flourish in a shared collective purpose. The love of the game, the circle of affection. In present-day America, however, This circle of affection looks a lot like a point of distrust. It does not appear that we share a common telos. So even when the rules are neutral, every contest devolves into a zero-sum game. It's every person for himself in all things, and that should concern us. Because as the very first anti-federalist essay, Sentinel-1, said, a republican or free government can only exist where the body of people are virtuous. Now, my point tonight is not to say that we've lost popular sovereignty, natural rights, and virtue. That would be a deeply depressing message. And if you know me, you know that I am through and through an eternal optimist. My point is a more modest one. It is that our republic was founded on broad agreement about the ultimate ends the government was supposed to serve. But to look at our great country today is to be struck by how many of those fundamental commitments are under serious disagreement. Now imagine that we did the same thing on a football field. Tomorrow night, back in Austin, what if one team shows up to play by Walter Chauncey Camp's rules and score touchdowns, and the other team shows up to inflict injuries? If you're like me, the natural question is, what should the referee do? As I mentioned earlier, as lawyers and judges, we tend to focus on the person who is neutral and who's there to enforce the rule of law, so that draws our attention naturally to the referee. And I think he basically has three choices. Option one is to enforce the football rules as they're written. Our ref knows those rules by heart. Those rules are neutral. Maybe he throws a lot of flags. Maybe he has to eject players. Maybe he even has to order the game forfeited. But those are all remedies contemplated by the rules, so he can just enforce them. Option two would be to identify the good team and to help them. Now, the rules don't allow that, but the bad team isn't playing by the rules either, so maybe the ref is merely restoring the purpose of the game by leveling the playing field. And option three, perhaps the most drastic, would be to just declare the end of football. Not just the game, but the season, or maybe the whole sport. The referee could literally take the football and go home on the theory that neither side agrees to the point of the game, so the game is not worth playing. Now, as between those options, options 2 and 3 are plainly off the table. It's not the ref's job to pick good and bad, and it far transgresses his commission to declare the end of football as we know it. So the ref's only real option is and always will be option number 1. He has to enforce the rules as written, and he has to do it neutrally. But hear me. That does not mean that the referee is a chump. He is not out there just throwing flags, blind to the circumstances around him. When the tempers flare on a gridiron, the referees play an important part in restoring order, in reminding everybody what is the purpose of the game we are playing, and crucially, in reestablishing the line of scrimmage. So too with republics. Recall that Henry Hart himself recognized that the neutral rules of legal process school only get you so far. They don't do much of anything to bridge substantive disagreements. To paraphrase one of my favorite books, No Country for Old Men, if the rules brought us to this, of what use were the rules? And that is why we need to refocus on the foundational promises of the Republic. Neutral rules are essential, of course, but so too is a broad agreement about why we have a republic in the first place, and what its ultimate ends, as reflected in these documents, always have been. But perhaps the most essential prerequisite to lowering the temperature is to bolster and defend the independence of the Supreme Court. It is the uber ref, and our system is imperiled when folks try to drag the ref into their fights. Think back to the most gruesome fights you've ever seen in competitive sports. My law clerks wanted me to talk about the so-called malice at the palace, which was a wild brawl that started in a 2004 NBA game in Detroit that spilled into the stands and eventually involved spectators. The one that's the most vivid to me was also in 2004, but it involved a hockey player named Todd Bertuzzi, who almost killed Steve Moore with a blindside punch and a pile drive into the ice that ended Moore's career and left him unconscious with 3 fractured vertebrae. You can no doubt think of others. But whichever one you think of tonight, I would hazard a guess that one thing is true about it. No one attempted to pile drive the referee. And that makes sense because players can get heated at each other. They can even get heated at the referees. But as soon as the violence spills over onto the neutral decision maker, the event risks descending into true chaos. Right now, the Supreme Court is under relentless attack. Some of it is physical. 2 years ago, a man was charged with attempted murder of Justice Kavanaugh. Some of it is directed at the justices' spouses and their children, and some of it is institutional, like the leak of the Dobbs opinion. But each of these is iconoclastic, and no one has ever won anything by pile driving a referee. So let me close with this. Every 6 weeks or so, I travel to New Orleans to hear oral arguments. And the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit sits in a grand courthouse. It is named for Judge John Minor Wisdom. Judge Wisdom is quite a name for a judge, isn't it? Judge Wisdom sat on my court for 40 years, including when it covered states that are now part of the 11th Circuit. Judge Wisdom was one of the so-called Fifth Circuit Four, known for carrying the desegregation mandate of Brown versus the Board of Education into an affirmative integration mandate in many walks of life. Judge Wisdom lived and judged in a time of intense turmoil and fundamental disagreement about the ends of the Republic. And in that divisive time, Judge Wisdom fulfilled his judicial role. He rose to the occasion, and he did what his office demanded of him amidst chaos and disorder. He threw flags, he called penalties, he was a referee. He also knew that part of his role was to restore the line of scrimmage, and certainly no one would call Judge Wisdom a chump. Judge Wisdom wrote an opinion called Bush versus Orleans Parish School Board, arguably the most influential decision ever rendered by my court. That decision desegregated the New Orleans public schools. And it was the inspiration behind a famous Norman Rockwell painting of a black girl named Ruby Bridges, who was escorted by U.S. Marshals to a judicially desegregated school. Do you think that Judge Wisdom understood that part of his job was restoring the constitutional order? Of course he did. To suggest otherwise would be freakish. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I thought it would be impossible to top Don Willett's address last year, which concerned Thomas Cooley and his great career, but this talk was so within the central focus of the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and you can hear how much everyone appreciates it, Andy. And it's on behalf of the center, I'd like to present you with this memento of tonight's occasion. I'm not going to wear it. Anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. We do have about 40 minutes for you to come step right up and examine our founding documents. It's the reason why we're here tonight. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all coming. And have a great evening. Enjoy our founding documents. Thank you.